All right, so we're going to be looking at a really quick overview of the human microbiome, and the main point of this particular lecture is just to really get at just the idea that there are a lot of organisms that colonize our bodies, both outside our body and within our bodies. And to give you just a couple basic facts about that, some trivia facts, and then to go over some of the different regions of the body and talk about who are the main bacteria that are found. So we'll talk about the distribution of some common bacteria. First off, with some pieces of information. There are well over 1,000 species of bacteria. Most of them have not been cultured. Most of them are known through gene sequencing. So by collecting samples and sequencing genes that we know belong to different bacteria, we can identify that they're there, but many of them haven't actually been cultured. If we look at bacterial cells versus human cells, there's over 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells that make up our bodies. So we have just a lot of bacterial cells. Now, partly because they're small. They're smaller, so they take up less space. So the volume of one human cell is much greater than the volume of a bacterial cell. But still, we have quite a lot of them. As a result, each bacteria has its own genome, which then is going to express proteins, and they're going to secrete chemicals that are going to affect our bodies. Humans have about 23,000 genes, but our microbiome, we're probably talking about 3 million genes from different bacteria that are being expressed in our bodies all the time. And so they're critically important for our function, for our bodies to function properly. And it is often see this little graph that I'll talk about in a second here. There's supposed to be a balance between the species and the composition of organisms, just like there is in any ecosystem. On the west coast of the United States, there is a lot of biodiversity in the intertidal areas where you have sea urchins, and you have mussels, and you have clams, and you have anemones of different species. There are sponges, barnacles, a variety of different organisms. And sea stars, who feed on several of these, keep the highest growing organisms in check. If you remove the sea star, the main predator, from the area, what you find is that one or two species overtake all the others, and the biodiversity is lost, or the whole area changes. And this can happen in our body through what we call a dysbiosis, where we're supposed to have a composition of bacteria in different proportions and many different species of bacteria, but if one bacteria takes over, even though it's supposed to be there, it's not a pathogen in a sense in that it's introduced to our body and it's producing toxins, but it is something that becomes out of balance, it can make you very ill, right, in doing that. So there's a certain balance that we've been finding in terms of the research, affects a lot of different aspects. Just to give you a quick summary of that as well, what do we know about the human biome? A lot of it is kind of recent. So back in, say, 1995 and before, probably less than 50. So less than, 50 publications a year. So about 50 scientific publications or less, and many years far less than that, on microbiome. Lots on bacteria, but mostly on disease-causing bacteria, not the bacteria that help us to do things. Jump forward to 2005, and in that kind of time period, right down here, maybe we're getting up to maybe about 250 publications a year. So more in the next 10 years. Jump to 2015, and we're getting, this should be the other way around. It's supposed to be less than 50. We're actually getting greater than maybe 3,000 publications a year on the human microbiome. So our knowledge of the human microbiome has increased vastly in just the last few years, really. Before that, most bacteria were kind of associated much more so with disease and not much in terms of causing it, not preventing it. And that's what we're finding is our microbiome, in a certain proportion that's appropriate, actually protects us from a lot of things. And it is when they get out of whack because we take antibiotics when we don't need to, that actually causes then other sorts of diseases that we experience. So that's quite through the introduction. All I'm going to do really now is kind of point out some areas of the body and some of the common bacteria that live there. And that's pretty much it. That's kind of what in our exam we're going to kind of have just a little section of parts of the body, naming them, and organisms or an organism or organisms that are the most common in that area. Start off with the outside, with your skin. With your skin, there are kind of three groups of organisms that are, or organisms themselves that are the most common. Propriona bacterium is often found on oily skin, but it's found on other types of skin too. It's found on moist skin as well. We have Corynebacteria. I'm trying to make sure I have the spelling on that. Bacteria. And then we have, Staphylococcus. Bacteria. These are the three groups that are kind of the most common on our skin. If we had to kind of break them down by different areas, like say, armpits here, where you have kind of moist skin. In these moist skin areas, we're going to find more of the Corynebacteria and Staphylococcus, right, in these areas. On areas, say, like your nose here, where it's kind of oily. Here we're going to find far more of the Propriona bacteria in oily areas, of your body. You're also going to have then patches of skin, like on your arms, like this, where we're going to see that it's mostly dry. Dry and maybe salty skin. So here we're going to see more Corynebacteria. And some of the beta proteobacteria. Now, and there's a lot of different organisms that we're going to find. Some areas of the outside of the body, it's very common to find fungi and so on. Viral genomes are found really commonly then right around the nose. We'll find a lot of viral genes in this particular area, usually not in a lot of other areas. So say on your feet is where you'll find more fungi. You don't typically find them in other parts of your body. So it's going to be different. There's a lot of different species that inhabit the skin. These are just some of the common ones in these particular areas. Now we're going to start to look inside the body. I'm going to erase a couple of these so just have a little more space here. We'll just keep the main groups up there, the skin bacteria. As we go into your mouth, one group that we find very common there is this gram-negative group called Fusobacteria. They're one of the non-proteo bacteria groups that we find. And you also find some Firmicutes, as well, some of those gram-positive bacteria. As we go into, say, the nasopharynx, up here, this area going through your nose back, you'll see more organisms like Staph aureus and Staph epidermidis. In these areas, as we go into the esophagus, start to go down, you'll start to find more Streptococcus and Prevotella. We find in these areas. What's going to happen drastically different here? One is the oxygen, so we find a lot more anaerobic bacteria. Also, then as we get to the stomach, we're going to start to experience highly acidic environment. Right? And so the stomach is then going to then contain organisms that can only survive that type of acidity. It's common to find Helicobacter in the stomach. Again, this is one of those bacteria that we do find in the stomach. However, it should not be the dominant organism in that area. There are a lot of other bacteria that live in that environment. What happens is that if some of those organisms are suppressed or killed off for some reason, and Helicobacter takes over, it then can cause ulcers in the stomach and actually lead to stomach cancer. Right? So an organism that is commonly there can actually lead to disease if it is out of proportion. Right? Also in the stomach we'll find some lactobacillus. And usually those are taken in really from early on, right from birth. Our bodies start to become colonized with bacteria. And through natural childbirth, like lactobacillus, for example, is one of the first bacteria that would then start to appear in the human's body. But if you're born by cesarean section, you end up being colonized more so by the bacteria of the skin and are completely lacking in some of the bacteria that we would normally find then in the digestive tract. And that can then lead to other issues and other problems down the line. So this is one of the big differences in the initial colonization of a person right from birth. Right? It was going to affect sort of their microbiome and their composition and the diversity of the microbiome really over time. Okay, so stomach, we kind of have the very acidic environment with these guys here. As we enter the small intestine, right, come over here, what we're going to see is there's really two main groups of organisms that we're going to find. We're going to see Firmicutes, bacteria gram-positive group. And then we're also going to see a lot of different types of proteobacteria. Actually, you know what I should do? I'm going to do this. Sorry. This will make this, though, a little bit easier to follow if I do it like this. So if I do the Firmicutes and the proteobacteria. That way they're kind of color-coded here. You can see with that. As we move down and the pH changes again, as we get to the large intestine, so the pH is going to start to become more close to neutral. And what we see is that while Firmicutes still maintains a hold on a large portion of that composition, we now see then Bacteroides there we go, taking over and making a large portion, over 50% of the bacteria of the large intestine. And then the proteobacteria are reduced, to a very small amount here. So proteobacteria also will include a lot of the organisms that you're familiar with that we work with in labs, like E. coli, will belong to this group. The Enterobacter will belong to this group. The Proteus will belong to this group. So a lot of these bacteria, all that we actually are familiar with, will belong to that particular group. So that balance people have also found recently has been tied to obesity. So if the balance is off and it's far more Firmicutes and less Bacteroides, that affects absorption in the large intestine and can lead to a whole number of problems and issues, including obesity, people have found. So that's kind of an overview, of some of these. Again, this is very simplistic, just kind of an introduction to some of the names associated with the main groups that we tend to find in certain areas. This is a continually growing field. It's one of the areas of research that is very, very active because there's so much still really unknown, and people are discovering really new things all the time. If you look at anything news in microbiology, you're going to find something about the microbiome almost any given day, and they're sometimes incredibly interesting and affect some very important aspects of human biology. So just kind of go over the basic overview of the microbiome, kind of know basic areas of the body. So for skin in general, dry, moist, oily skin, and then as you kind of take a trip through your digestive system, have the basic idea of one or two of the major organisms or groups of organisms that are found in each of the regions.